I guess with the fear of possibly overdrawing this thing, I'm gonna go ahead and stop right there, and as you can see, piece of cake. Hey YouTube, Rick Douglas here with another quick tutorial, and I have a couple of tips to help you guys draw some really nice realistic hair. Time lapse is going to be going on somewhere in that region up in the top right hand corner. And I'm going to show you guys some of the techniques that I used in that hair study. Now for those of you guys who are interested, I'm going to go ahead and put a link right about there of the time lapse without me doing any of this narrative. Those of you guys who want to watch just the time lapse, you can. Now the tools that I used are going to be the same ones that I used in how to draw an eye video, and the link to that one will be in the description. I'm actually going to be adding two tools to my arsenal for this hair tutorial. The first one is going to be a Q-tip, and then the second thing that I'm going to be using to lift out some of those highlights is a click eraser. And this one is really good. To be honest with you guys, I have never used a click eraser before this hair tutorial, and that's kind of the beauty behind drawing constantly, is that you just keep adding tools to your arsenal, and this one now has a permanent place, and I'll show you guys why. Now hair is my second most favorite thing to draw, with eyes being my favorite, simply because you have some artistic flexibility with it, more so than with any other feature of a portrait, in my opinion. Today is going to be focused on female hair. Today is going to be focused on female hair, not only because it's luscious and it's beautiful and a lot of fun to draw, but also because it offers just a better foundation for me to help illustrate the techniques that I use in a little bit more of a visible way. Now, what do I mean by artistic flexibility? Well, say for instance you're drawing a commissioned portrait. There are specific features that you have to get 100% dead on in order for the likeness to be correct in your drawing. Those features include eyes. That's probably the single most important thing, is that you have to get the eyes 100% dead on. Cheekbones structure, your eyebrows. The eyebrows play a large role in the overall expression of the drawing. And so you have to get the expression correct in order for it to look like the picture. The jawline has to be correct, the shape of the face, the shape of the smile, which also plays another role in the expression. So you have to get the shape of the smile, if there's one present, correct, and so on and so forth. Things where you have some flexibility. Now keep in mind, when I'm talking about some flexibility, I am talking about a small margin of error. Things that you can mess up on and kind of cover up a little bit, and it won't impact the overall likeness of the portrait too much. A couple of those areas include the nose shape. Given that it's not a side profile where the nose is prominent, you can mess up a little bit on the nose shape and kind of cover it up. Teeth would be another one. Lips, lip shape, mouth shape, clothing is a big area, ears, things like that. And of course, my absolute favorite is hair. Now the overall shape of the hair does need to be somewhat accurate in order for the likeness to still be there. But the rendering of the hair is a place where you can play around with. You can add some highlights, add some shadows, and this is where you really have some creative flexibility. You can fix some imperfections or even add some imperfections, all without impacting the overall likeness of the portrait too much. In fact, if you can really nail the hair, especially if the portrait has a lot of hair and it takes up a large amount of real estate on your paper, they'll often overlook other flaws simply because of how beautiful you were able to render the hair. So let's just go ahead and start with the 3 foundation tips. Now these are the fundamentals to drawing anything. Anything you guys want is available to you if you can learn to master these 3. Now what are they? The first one is practice. Everybody knows this, so I'm not going to dive into it too much, but you have to practice. Everything in this video, from the tips and the techniques, doesn't mean anything unless you practice and find your own style. Number 2 is going to be confidence. Now the best way to build confidence obviously is by practicing and constantly improving your technique. But if you get a portrait, say for instance with a lot of hair, instead of dreading it and questioning your ability to draw it perfectly and recreate it perfectly, that's something I used to do and struggle with all the time. With confidence, you can relax. You can enjoy the fact that you have some ability to flex your artistic muscles here without too much of an impact on the overall picture. And then once you get some serious confidence behind you, then you can actually enhance the drawing quite a bit. So confidence is key. Number 3 is going to be patience. Patience, attempting to draw pretty much anything realistically will test your patience, almost to a breaking point sometimes. But if you can learn to harness this patience, it can turn the process of drawing to almost a therapeutic level. Now realistic hair isn't done in 1 layer or even 2 layers or possibly even the 10th layer. So take your time, enjoy the process, and just have some fun with it. Now, a quick note that I wanted to make about patience specifically. One immediate way that I was able to increase my patience was the music that I was listening to while I was drawing. I went from a fast-paced, kind of a rock music, that's generally the music that I liked to listen to while I'm in the car, things like that. But for drawing, I found that it made me a little bit jittery and made my heart race a little bit. Now, I'm talking like a minuscule amount, but it did impact me, and it did impact my patience because my mind was going a lot faster than my hand was. And so in order for me to slow down my mind, slow down everything, and just take my time and have some patience, I went to a calming, almost an ambient music. I like a lot of piano, a lot of cello, orchestral type of music, and this played a huge role in my overall demeanor while I was drawing, and I found myself a lot more patient and a lot more relaxed. That's a quick tip. Alright guys, let's just dive straight into the drawing techniques. Now I want to preface this by saying that I am going to go fairly quickly. The main reason why is just because I don't want a really long video. It can easily go over an hour. So the first tip that I have for you guys is going to be try to master the flick, or get yourself familiar and comfortable with doing the flick hundreds and thousands of times, because that's really what it takes in order to achieve realistic hair. So what is the flick? Well, the flick, I'm not too sure what other artists call it, it's just what I call it, but I am going to use a protective paper here just to put my hand on it. The flick is just flicking your pencil from one starting point, and in this case I'm going upwards, so I'm varying the pressure. I'm starting with a pretty firm pressure and then just flicking my pencil upwards. And you're gonna do this over and over and over again when you're trying to do some realistic hair. So a good practice too would be to come from the top down. The whole goal here is to kind of cover as much of the paper as possible with some graphite, with the first layer of graphite. And so in order to do so, I am using the flat side of my pencil. I'm not using the sharp edge. I'm using more of the flat edge. And then just keep flicking your pencil over and over and over again, varying your pressure. And that would be the flick. Another good thing would be to practice it going at a curve. And so, let's say for instance, the curve goes that way. So just flick your pencil over and over and over again at a curve. You'll use this all the time, especially when you're doing female hair. And then also come from the top down if you can, kind of curve it. Alright, anyway, so that's extremely important because you are going to spend the majority of your time just doing the flick. So the next thing would be to break the hair up into shapes. And so what do I mean by that? Well, say for instance you get a portrait and it has a large amount of hair on it, takes up a lot of the real estate of your paper. Well, it can be a little bit intimidating looking at all that hair, figuring out, man, how the heck am I going to render this? So what I recommend doing, a good practice to take away some of that intimidation, is just to break it up into shapes, maybe 4, 5, 6 shapes, depending on how complex the hair is. It can go upwards of a dozen, and then just tackle it one shape at a time. So what I do is that I would break it up into shapes, and then from within each shape I would find and mark the darks and the highlights, and then just tackle it one shape at a time until the whole thing is done. So what are some of these shapes I'm talking about? Well, I'll just do a quick one here. Hair, as a general rule, will start at a point, it'll gather at a point, it'll flare out, and then it'll probably gather at another point. And so I would find those point to points. Well, let's say for instance this one kind of comes down and around like this, and then maybe from the top it comes around like this. So that would be a general hair shape. And then from within this shape, I would find the highlight and just mark it. And I would do it super, super light, so where even you can almost barely see it. I'm kind of darkening it a little bit, so hopefully you guys can see it on camera. But just find the band of light. We'll say the band of light is right about there. And then I would move on to the second shape, which we'll say kind of goes, we'll start it here. We'll do kind of a similar one. Something like that. And then I would find the band of light, and in this case I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of that first shape. Probably have it come down at an angle. And then this one kind of following the same contour there. And then I would find and mark the darks of each shape too. So picture this as one giant hair piece. So I would go through the entire thing, find all the highlights, and then I'd go through the entire thing and mark all the darks. So in this case, I'm going to say the darks are kind of back here in the corner. The way that I'm marking it is just by, of course, flicking my pencil. We'll say that the darks kind of come upwards from down here. I'm following the contour of this line when I'm flicking my pencil. So you guys can see the line is kind of shaped a little bit oddly on my part. So if you have one that's kind of shaped like that, you have a choice where you can flick your pencil over and over again just to bring the two together, or you can follow the contour of one and then just kind of pronounce that and then kind of push the second one backwards. Hopefully that makes any kind of sense, but in this case I am pushing pushing this piece back here to the back, and I'm following the contour there. So basically I'm just finding the darks here. And also I'm creating the flow of the hair, which direction the hair is flowing. You can say the grain of the hair. I'm creating the grain, the direction of the hair grain. So we'll say that the other dark is up here. Another dark is here. We'll make all the corners dark here. All right, and so that would be the start for me. And then I would go through the third shape, and then the fourth shape. And if it's a complex piece, then you know the dozens. It could possibly be upwards of over a dozen. So what would I do next? Well, the next thing that I would do is grab my 0.7 millimeter. It has a 2B lead inside of it. This one is a 0.5 millimeter. It has an HB. So it's a little bit harder of a lead, which means that it lays down a little bit lighter. This one is a softer lead, so it's going to lay down a little bit darker. And so I'd go through the entire drawing and really accent where those dark areas come from. And then I would just flick my pencil over and over and over again using the flat side of my pencil. And just try to cover up as much of this white paper as possible in the dark areas using the flick. So that's why I'm using the white side. It covers up a little bit more of the paper with each flick. And it also does not create too harsh of a line, of a pencil line with each flick. That'd be a decent start there. And come down from the top down. And I'm just trying to accent exactly where the band of light is. So in this case, the dark is back there, the band of light is right there, and that's pretty clear to me. Maybe clean this up just a little bit. Okay, and then just move on to the next shape. And if you were drawing from a reference photo, I would look at the photo and see, is this shape behind this one? And if so, then I would create a dark line here just to show me, or just to tell me its place. And then just do the same thing, just keep flicking and flicking and flicking. So you get to the highlighted band. Then just come from the top down, do kind of the same thing. Now this one, I'm kind of flicking at an angle, like that. So I'm kind of making the hair gather up here, and then I'm also flicking from the corners, somewhere around there. From the edge. And then just accent the band of light, just so I can see it really clearly. And then of course I'd do the whole thing. Alright guys, so let's just actually go ahead and finalize layer number 1. I'm going to go ahead and use a small blending stump here. It's already a little bit dirty on the end, so it won't lift too much of the graphite. Instead it'll smudge some of that graphite away. And I'm going to do the same flicking motion that I did with my pencil, so this time with the blending stump. And the whole objective here is to get rid of as many pencil lines as possible, because in real life, obviously, there's no pencil lines, so we want to get rid of all those harsh lines. Also, a couple of key notes here while I'm flicking downwards is that anytime that you use any type of blending tool, it'll always lift up that graphite. So it's really important to do layers, because you see like some of these really nice darks are now a gray, but it is softer. It's not as harsh. Anytime that you put down some graphite, it will make it a little bit gritty. And of course hair isn't gritty, so it's kind of finding that balance between adding grittiness but adding darks whenever you use graphite, and then adding softness but taking away some of that grittiness and taking away some of those darks with the blending tool. So that's why it's important to do layers, because you want both. You want it to be really nice and dark, but you also want it to be soft. The best way to do that is by doing it in layers. So I would just go back over all this and just flick my pencil, bring out some of those blacks again. And I'm just kind of playing around. I just made this shape up, so I'm just kind of shaping it as I go. And then just bringing some of those darks back out. Okay, so we're just going to do this really quickly. And this is layer number 2, I believe. So whenever starting layer number 2, this is actually a good point to start breaking up this band of light. So now it looks kind of ridiculous, where the band of light is perfect and then you got some really nice darks there. So now I'm going to start randomly breaking it up. Now this is again where the beauty of drawing hair is, because you can improv, you can play around with it. It doesn't have to look exactly like the photograph, just the basic shape has to be there. So I'm doing a really light flick and just kind of randomly breaking it up here. A mistake that I used to make a lot when I was younger and just learning how to do portraits was that I was kind of scared to connect one dark area with the other dark area and break up this band of light. So when I look back at my drawings from back then, seeing that I broke it up just a little bit, but not realistically, because I was nervous to take away the light source. And it always eats at me. So that is not the case. You definitely have to break it up. So I'm just flicking randomly. Some of these are harder pressure and some of them are really, really light. Okay, so I'm just going to make these really clear and distinguished as far as what shape is which, just so I don't lose it, at least in this very early stage. Okay, and then from here, I'm going to go ahead and blend them together. And this can get kind of monotonous over time when you're doing this and you're on layer number 6 and you're just adding darks and then blending it together and then lifting highlights and then adding darks and blending it together and lifting highlights. It can get really tedious. So that's why you'll see me, at least in the hair study up there, I'll jump around all over the place just to kind of keep my sanity. If things start to get monotonous, that's actually where you start making mistakes too, if you start to rush it. So instead of doing that, it's a really good idea just to go to a different area and do a different shape. Okay, so I'm also blending onto that band of hair again. I'm blending onto the band of hair here because I want to add a nice layer of gray, a little layer of graphite, so that when I lift the highlights I can see where I'm lifting it. So let's just do that right now. I'm just shaping my kneaded eraser here. I'm just going to do some random hash marks. Now the light, or this band of highlight here, can totally go different directions from the grain. That's the beauty behind it too, is that I'll make, like, say for instance, I'll do an X. So there's an X. And you can make this go in all sorts of crazy directions because you can just cover it up. I'm gonna go ahead and start connecting these two shapes. And the best way to do that real fast is that I am gonna use light to connect the two. So you'll see there's no line really in between those two anymore. And then I'm going to connect the darks as well. So let's just do a couple random shapes there, kind of reshaping my kneaded eraser every few strokes. I'm also going to bring some of that light down into the darks and up into the darks too. Okay, and that would be layer number one. So the next thing that I would do is grab my smaller 0.5 millimeter that has a HB lead inside of it again, so it's a little bit harder. And then because it is a little bit harder, it lays down a lot lighter than the 2B lead does. So I'll just go over this kind of lightly and take away some of those harsh edges from that kneaded eraser. And just bring back out some of those hair lines, some of that hair grain. But just going over it really lightly. Again, I'm using the flat side of my pencil. Figuring out what works, what I like, and what I don't like. And covering up those marks that I don't like, and then leaving those marks that I do. So I kind of like this band of light that goes down there, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm just finding, again, what works, what I like, what I don't like. There we go. So now that the light's broken up, I'm going to bring back out some of these darks. And then using these darks with my 2B lead, I'm going to accent some of those areas that I really like. So in this case, it has a band of light here, so I'm going to go ahead and put kind of a nice little dark contrast kind of next to it to make it pop a little bit. And this is where you really start creating the depth of the hair. Do the same thing, varying my pressure. Same thing on this shape. I like that dark line there, so I'm going to go ahead and accent it just a little bit. Kind of like that little dark area there too. So I'm going to go ahead and make this kind of a dark valley. And then just accent a couple of these bands of lights here. So let's just come from the top down real quick. Just getting the darks into place, and then I'm going to bring some of these darks in some random directions onto the band of light. Kind of like that. So I'm going to go ahead and make this one continuous shape. So it's going to connect from here to up there. That's going to be kind of a band of hair there, a little string of hair. I'm going to accent. And this is where you start creating the shape from within each shape. If that makes any sense. I'm not too familiar with, or I'm not used to commentating while I'm drawing. Normally I just have my favorite song on, and knowing me, I'm normally singing along, accidentally spitting on my paper from time to time. You know you guys do it too. I can't be the only one. You can kind of see that this shape is a little bit darker than this shape, so really quickly I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping this up here soon. I'm going to go ahead and kind of connect the two using the darks. So I kind of took away the defining line between the two, but I'm going to go ahead and accent the really super blacks. So I'm pushing fairly hard down here. I don't like how that one's perfect. That's too perfect. So I'm going to break that up. I'm going to accent the darks really down here just to make sure I push it back. But it's also combining the two, so you can't tell there's like a hard line separating the two shapes anymore. I'm going to do kind of something similar here. Except in this case, I'm going to use light to help add, or to help combine these two together. Way to do that. Again, getting your kneaded eraser out. Just adding a little light area there. And then just do the whole process again. Adding random light areas, and then again I'd go through, break up this light with my small 0.5mm HB lead, and just keep going. And it can take upwards of, like I said, over a dozen layers to really get the amount of depth that makes you happy. So in this case, I'm just gonna really quickly, just for the sake of time, kind of break up a lot of this light. Alright, so a really quick thing that I wanted to show for contrast is a lot of times to make this hair really pop out, or make these two shapes really pop out, you have to have the proper contrast. So we'll say, for instance, that there's a bunch of background hair, and they have a bunch of really nice shapes too, so we'll bring this up and something like that. But if you have some really nice darks in the background, it'll help make these two shapes pop out even more. But where I was really going with this is that if, say for instance, you have a super dark background here that's pretty much black. Well, in that case then you have to make at least the corners of these almost black. You have to make them match. So on this one, I'm gonna make this really, really black back here. At least in this top area. So if I were to make around here really black, well then this really dark gray, hopefully you guys can see that, well then this really dark gray area kind of stands out. It doesn't really fit. So I would darken it in a lot to make it match and make it look like it's emerging from that really black area in the background. Okay? And then try not to blow on your paper. Always try to use a brush of some sort. That's a horsehair brush, so it doesn't smudge the graphite at all. Alright, so let me go ahead and just bring out some of those. Okay, so I'm working on this too much. The perfectionist inside of me is kind of coming out. So the last thing that I wanted to cover, guys, is going to be wisps and flyaways. And so how do we go about creating the proper wisp and the proper flyaway? Well, it's kind of an art form all in itself. A mistake that a lot of people make is that they'll do kind of lines that, for flyaways, they'll do lines that are a little bit too harsh. Basically, flyaways are super fine hairs that kind of break away from the group and do their own thing. And so they're almost barely visible in most cases. Sometimes they're really visible, but in most cases they're barely visible. So what I like to do is that anytime I have a hard edge like this, normally it would be much more crisp. Let's just do a really crisp edge just to kind of show you guys. I'll do a crisp edge there around the darks. Okay, so say for instance that's really crisp. So I'm going to use my blending tool and break it up a little bit. So I'm going to bring out some of those hard edges and just soften them up. And that makes the whole hair as a whole really soft looking. It makes it really nice and fluffy. So because we're going to push this kind of in the background, I'm going to go ahead and add some graphite here just to show how I go about getting some wisps. A good way to do that is by using a Q-tip, a dirty Q-tip. That's pretty ugly looking in some areas, but just for the sake of the tutorial here, we'll do a couple of flyaways. Now the key to flyaways is that I'm going to barely hold my pencil to where it's almost, I'm holding all the weight and I'm not putting any weight or any pressure onto the tip. So I'm just going to make a few marks, and you guys will probably barely be able to see them if at all. And it's up to you of how messy you really want to make this hair look. So if you're looking for like the waking up in the morning bedhead type of look, then you can go like crazy. Now what I would do is find a couple of the wisps that I like. Say for instance this wisp here, and as it comes in contact with the main group of hair, it usually is darker. And then it does its own thing. And so this way at least it marks out like hey, there's a wisp there and it's conjoining the rest of the group in certain areas. So I would darken up a few of them, but just find a few that you like and accent them. And also some of them, as they arch, will get darker and then get lighter as they get closer to the group of hairs. So it's just playing around with the ones that you like and leaving out the ones that you don't. So sometimes I'd even go back over it with the blending tool, kind of blend them in so it pushes them back a little bit, and then do another layer on top of it. Another thing that you can do for wisps, especially the ones that are kind of forced in the background, they're out of focus, is that you can create them using a small blending stump. So for instance, we'll create a wisp that looks like this, and they're out of focus in the background. Those are kind of funky looking wisps, but you kind of get the idea. So the last thing I want to cover, guys, is using a click eraser to achieve some of those wisps or those flyaways that kind of cross over the hair as a whole. And how do you cut through the graphite with those nice white lines, things like that? Well, the way that I do it is by using a click eraser. There's many different ways that you can do this. Some people prefer using like a gel pen, something like that. But the problem that I have with it is that a lot of times the gel ink does not match the same color of brightness and the same white as the paper. So if there's any type of visible white on the paper, it's gonna look different than the white in the wisps because they're two different shades. And so I kind of steer away from that. Another thing that people do is that they can gouge the paper. Say for instance, they gouge the paper. We'll do it on this piece with something sharp. And then they just kind of sketch over it. And that way the white stays there. And it can look like a wisp. And some people have great success with that, especially when they're doing animals and they have whiskers. That looks really good. Another way of doing it is by using a needle or an electric eraser. I used to use an electric eraser. The only problem is that it does damage the tooth of the paper. So if you make any type of mistakes, you really can't fix it without it standing out quite a bit. So I steer away from that. And I eventually just went back to using my kneaded eraser to a really sharp tip and just taking my time and picking away at it. Well, recently I just picked up this click eraser here and I am sticking with it. So what I do is that I make sure that the edges are sharp and then just really softly create a wisp. This one's a little bit messed up, but create a wisp that breaks through the hair as a whole. So in this case, I'll just create another one here, another wisp. And because this area is gray back here, it shows up back there too. So it looks like it's coming out of nowhere and then just crossing over it. Things like that. You can make really dark ones. You can do them in one swoop if you'd like. So some of these really hard graphite edges here, like this is super black, then just go over it little bit by little until it eventually picks it up. And as long as you use the correct drawing techniques and you didn't damage the tooth of your paper or stain it by pushing down really hard, then you should be able to lift it up with a click eraser. And that's pretty much about it, guys. That is the exact process that I do. I just do it multiple times over and over again until I get to the level where I feel comfortable with it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys found this helpful. Please stay tuned to my channel because I am coming out with quite a few tutorials in the upcoming weeks. Let me know if there's any type of questions that I can help you guys out with. And until next time, guys, I hope you have a good one.